Oftentimes, what happens when discussing certain concepts in relation to politics or history is you often come across the phenomena of ought claims or ought propositions disguised as is claims or is propositions. What I mean by that is oftentimes you come across concepts where it seems as if they're describing a certain reality or describing a certain phenomena that occurs in the real world, whereas what they're really saying is that things ought to be a certain way or things should be a certain manner. The issue that often arises is it becomes very difficult to distinguish between the two when they're not worded properly, when they're not explained in their proper manner and context. And furthermore, the way to prove these two separate things becomes very difficult. For example, let's talk about the concept of liberty, or the concept of equality, or the concept of human rights. In reality, these are very much metaphysical and philosophical claims or concepts that require a bit more of a deeper philosophical grounding for them. The Enlightenment project sought to base itself on the scientific method, and hence it essentially downplayed the importance of metaphysics and philosophy and prioritized the scientific project and the scientific method. Yet, ironically, a lot of the concepts developed in this time, which were ultimately derived supposedly from this scientific method, this ultra rationalistic outlook, such as human rights, liberty, and equality, were in fact metaphysical philosophical concepts. They weren't is claims, that is to say, they weren't really describing the way the world is. They weren't saying that the world is a certain way, this is how it operates. What they really were ought claims that the world ought to be this way, that human society ought to be organized in such a manner which can guarantee equality, liberty, and maintain these fundamental rights for all individuals. Hence, a metaphysical and philosophical grounding in reality is necessary for these sort of different concepts to be valid in the first place. Not the scientific method, not the scientific project, not the idea that we can only know about things if we observe the material world, but deeper, more intuitions about the rights and privileges that all human beings have. This is ought distinction, so to speak, which is employed and first developed to a sophisticated degree by David Hume, solves a lot of issues because not only does it allow us to distinguish between the two and hence not to fall into confusion regarding how to properly operationalize the two, it also helps us to focus on those oughts which we can bring about and we can, you know, sort of operationalize and employ to improve the lives of people, improve the society around us, versus those ought claims which may be in the realm of delirious utopian grand thinking that can't really be employed in the real world. And oftentimes this extreme utopian thinking can in fact lead to even worse acts of oppression and even worse conditions in a society. And hence this is all distinction is very important in helping us to understand certain concepts, how to operationalize them within a societal context, and how to solve certain issues by these ought reforms that we suggest.